do my spiel again. But basically, Form Lab is going to be a podcast where we break down all form questions and kind of just disc golf form as a whole. We're going to basically be taking questions from you guys right now. Those are basically just text questions that I've gotten off of Instagram or Max gotten off his Instagram. And then in the future, we're also going to be doing like video and voice submission questions as well. And then we're going to have a lot of like fun segments in episodes to come where we'll be able to be breaking down pros forums. We'll even be having other guests on as well to kind of talk about their form journeys and some of their form thoughts and get some of your questions answered by them as well, which is going to be very exciting. And you guys obviously heard Max everything. So yeah.
Yeah, kind of piggybacking off that though, I think we should kind of introduce ourselves. I gave a little small intro, but one thing I wanted to know about you is I think most people know who you are. Maybe you can go into that a little bit, your background, but I want to know how you developed your form.
Okay.
If you like had YouTube people, if you had a pro that you've went off of or like a coach or something. I'm always curious for that.
Yeah. So, well, I guess I should just introduce myself probably. But I'm Tristan Tanner. I've been playing on the Disc Golf Pro Tour for, I guess, since 2019. This will be my sixth season coming up, I believe.
Wow.
Um, and yeah, so I've been doing a lot of that. I've been coaching for most of that time. I started coaching probably about 2019 as well. And kind of to answer your question, Mac, I taught myself completely all the way through, like by videoing myself and watching videos of pros throwing. And so I feel like part of that is like why I'm such a good coach because I went through the whole entire process myself that a lot of people have to go through of like recording themselves and seeing things or trying to work on things, over exaggerating feelings
Mhm.
or just trying to get the mechanical pieces like working properly. And I think because I went through that whole process, I just understand like the levels of going through because obviously everyone's at a different place with their form, and people hit different places at different times. And I think just in general you can tell by a few pieces of someone's form like how deeply they've worked on form. And so I think
Mhm.
just that background of making every single little adjustment myself is really, really helpful when it comes to like me teaching and just kind of
Yeah.
understanding where
Uh,
people are because I can understand how frustrating it is to
yeah.
work on form sometimes.
Yeah, 100%. I always tell people like I understand your pain because I was there at one point for a long time, hopefully longer than you're going to be there, right?
For
So,
sure.
um, you said you modeled off of pros. Did you have any one specific pro?
Um, I mean, for a while, I like tried to model, or at least like my feelings were like modeled after Eagle a little bit.
That's a
And
good person.
like I started playing in Colorado, like near Boulder, and I like started playing league with Eagle like I don't know, not long after starting playing. I mean, within the first year for sure.
Mhm.
And so I think like he was definitely inspirational in my form, but I feel like there's been people that I like try to take bits and pieces from like through my whole career really. But like yeah, Eagle's been a big inspiration. Paul Macbeth has been an inspiration at one point. I think Gannon right now is a little bit of an inspiration for my form just because he's so clean and just the way he's playing the game right now is
Yeah.
inspirational.
It's
Uh,
hard to not be inspired.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And not necessarily like from a form perspective, like a little bit just like the simplistic form that he has. Like he doesn't do anything extra. It's just very
Mhm.
easy. He doesn't like throw out of his shoes. He just like takes his stock form, that simple form, and just does it over and over and over again. And he can
Yeah.
throw far out of it. So there's definitely some inspiration from there. Um, but
Yeah.
it's kind of a constantly adapting thing, and I've had enough good tournaments in my career or like times where I've been playing really well, where for me now it's more just like trying to figure out what I was doing at those times and like try to find those
Mhm.
pieces again. as opposed to like doing any like overhauls in like
Yeah.
form and trying to completely change the way I throw.
Yeah. It is interesting because I'm kind of in a similar place where for a long time it was I basically had a checklist of like I need to fix this, this, and this eventually, but I can
Hmm.
only do like one or two at a time. And
Yeah,
now I feel like I've pretty much gotten all the big ticket items, and it's like, well, I need to make a slight tweak here, slight tweak there, which is way harder, by the way.
way harder.
Way
Yeah,
harder to make the slight tweaks.
so much
So
harder.
yeah, and when we're talking about gaining that extra like 20 feet of 500 plus, not to toot my own horn or anything, but I've hit 500 a couple times.
Yeah,
um but when you're talking about that, that is such a different distance gain than 400 to 420, or like especially
absolutely.
300 to 320. I mean, I'm confident most people I could get from 300 to 320 in a single session.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And it's funny because most of the things that are talked about, or so many of the things that are talked about, like with disc golf form, are like the specific things that might get someone from throwing that who is throwing 480 to like maybe throwing 490. Like
Hmm.
people talk about like rotating on your heel and like that kind of
Yeah.
stuff, which like is important, but so many people are doing so many other things like wrong before
Hmm.
that, like have a completely messed up peak reach back, or are like throwing way nose up, or their timing's completely off, but then they're like trying to focus on how that heel is turning. And
Yeah.
so I think it's just like so backwards. And that's where too, like, and where Formero really helps is that like personalized help. Because I feel like,
Yeah.
and what we're trying to fill with this podcast too is just having something to address people's questions like directly, and
Hmm.
analyze people's form directly, because there's a lot of teaching on disc golf right now, but it's not personalized. It's like completely, it's just not arbitrary, but it's like completely like blanket statements, like trying to help
Super
everybody with
general.
one thing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Which is just not, obviously not the most efficient way to get better.
100%. And you can have all of the correct information in the world out there on YouTube, but if you don't know what you need to work on, it's not going to help you because
Yeah.
you can find 20 videos and they all might be right,
Yep.
but you might not need to work on that, or it might not be the most pressing thing for you to work on.
For
So it's
sure.
not going to be the most efficient.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, do we want to jump into some questions?
yeah,
Get
let's
rolling
do
on
it.
some stuff. These will be questions from my Instagram. We'll start with. Um, First one, and I feel like this is a pretty common thing that people struggle with. The first one is, I often throw rollers from a backhand. Any tips on fixing that issue? You want to kind of head that off?
Yeah, so that could be a couple of things, right? So if you're accidentally throwing rollers, I'm gonna guess you're throwing flippy stuff, which is not a bad thing, right? That's great, especially if you have lower arm speeds to try and get distance. But it does take a little bit more finesse to throw that flippy stuff and do it accurately and consistently.
Yep.
So if that's a struggle you have like a lot, you might want to consider throwing slightly more stable stuff. But from a foreign perspective, what that's going to indicate to me is that you're probably rolling over on your throw. You probably have a very upper body exaggerated follow through. I would guess, having never seen this person's form, that they're not using as much lower body as they should, and they're trying to arm the disc
Hmm.
pretty much as possible. You could also get some bad angles from maybe wrist position. There's a lot of things that could go wrong. My guess would be that there's too much upper body, not enough lower body, based purely on experience, because that's the problem I see 90% of people have.
For sure. What do you feel like is the difference between, um or like the, like what does it cause in the upper body when like you're not using enough lower body? Because obviously like we're like trying to use the lower body to kind of like start the swing and create a little bit of that like lag and separation that people talk about. But like how exactly does the form change from a lower body, like a more army swing, relative to
Mhm.
like what a pro does, where they're like starting with the lower body and creating that lag? Like what's that
Yeah.
difference?
So one thing that I always see that is, or that I always use as an indicator is if you take a slow motion video of you from a side profile. So basically you'll be facing the camera when you're throwing. Um, if you get to the point of your full extension power pocket and you look at the power pocket being when your elbow is at its furthest extended point before you start unfurling your arm, um, if you look at that and you can draw a kind of, I guess it's obtuse, an angle there, then you're going to be leading the throw with your upper body too much, your shoulder in particular. A lot of people just try and put everything they can into their throwing arm,
Yeah.
and gain as much power as they can there, which is important for a high level if you're trying to throw max distance, right? You need to throw
Hmm.
hard. But
Yeah.
for the majority of people, you're going to get way better results just throwing smooth with the correct mechanics,
Yeah.
which everyone's heard that before. So, one thing I always like to say is we don't actually lead the throw with the arm or the shoulder. You want to lead your throw with the hip. And what that's going to do is it's going to keep your center of gravity on your back leg longer. It's going to give you more weight shift in your actual hips, generate a little more power that way. And it's going to help you to get um, a higher launch angle for one, which can have its own issues, right? This is a give and
Yeah.
take in any scenario. Um, but especially if you're rolling over on it, that means you're probably throwing the disc pretty low, right? So you're going to want to get a little more air under it.
Yeah.
But in general, getting those hips to kind of drive through the throw first.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I think like a big part of that too is like people are too tense in their upper body. Because like to be
Hmm.
able to start with your lower body and create that separation when the arm's coming through, you need to be relatively loose in the upper
Hmm.
body and the arm specifically. Like the shoulders and the core can be a little bit more tense, but the arm really has to be pretty loose because if you're just stiff with your arm, there's no ability to create that lag. Like even if you start with your lower body early, like everything is just going to be rotating together. And,
Right.
one of the biggest things that I have to teach people is to grip the disc less hard, but then
Mhm.
also like have their body stiffness be less. So like I always
Yeah.
teach more of like a 2 or 3 out of 10 on grip pressure because most people when they tell me they're like, "Oh, I
Yeah.
grip it like an 8 because I early release it." And I'm like,
Right.
"All right, let's try it. Let's try it 2 and we'll see where that
Loosen it
gets
up a
us."
little there, buddy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And same thing with body tenseness. Like people when they're starting or they're setting up in their throw, they always tell me like, "Oh yeah, I'm like a 8 out of 10 like trying to get into this form position that you told me to start in." I'm like okay, like
Hmm.
you're correct. Like I want you to start in this position, but like while you're in there, I want you to, you know, be really solid or really loose in that position.
Yeah. So, a couple points on what you just said. I always tell people when they ask how hard they should grip it is, because I actually have the opposite experience of you. Is I a lot of times see people aren't gripping the disc hard enough, and
Okay.
so they're actually. I ask people a lot, like, are you letting go of the disc or are you letting it come out of your hand,
For
right? Because a
sure.
lot of people are trying to like actually time their release and you're not getting that full rotations out of it, and it's a big distance negative for a lot of people. So I always like to say, grip pressure wise, imagine you're holding like a hot cup of coffee, not one that's going to burn your hand, but it's pretty full, you don't want to spill it. That amount of firmness, that's kind of what I think you should go off of. You should be gripping it hard enough to where the plastic isn't deforming under your fingers.
Yeah.
But if I move the disc in your hand, it's not going to actually move within your hands.
Definitely. Definitely. There is like there's a happy medium of those two because like I feel like the worse someone's form is or the more rounding there is in a throw specifically, the harder they do have to grip the disc. Because if you're rounding really bad and you're getting stuck behind your trail shoulder and you're
Mhm.
gripping it soft, like it is going to come out early every single time.
Yeah.
But if we can get you, a little bit more rotated at peak reach back and having being pulling on a straight line, reaching away straight from the target, then you have the ability then to, loosen up. And it's generally after we do kind of like the few things that I start with most people, and that's starting position and how we're getting to peak reach back, like with a, more of a shoulder rotation as we're extending, less of a reach across the body. And then once we get those things established, that's when, we come in and say, like, hey, how hard are you gripping the disc? Are you
Yeah, yeah,
gripping a
yeah.
10 out of 10 pressure?
Right.
Because obviously, a lot of people have rounding issues. And so if you
Mhm.
have rounding issues, like, try to work on those rounding issues first, but then after that, then try to, soften up a little bit.
Yeah, grip is easy to overlook. It's
It
sometimes I
is.
forget to think about it when I'm diagnosing someone and it kind of just like clicks. Like, how are you actually holding this disc? Oh,
Yeah,
that's been your problem the whole time.
for sure. For sure. Um, okay, let's go on to second question. Second question is there a cue or technique that is best for hitting narrow lines, disc out late and early a lot? That's like very closely related to what we were
Hmm.
just talking about. And cue, I think there's a lot of cues that can work for different people. I think generally when you're trying to throw down a tight gap, you probably want to look at that gap like as long as you can, because most people do the like, okay, I'm looking at my target, and then as soon as I start my run up, I like turn away and like
Yeah,
hope that I'm gonna hit it.
yeah.
And so I think first thing, for everyone is to just like keep your eyes on your target like as long as you can, and then let your reach back like naturally this lead shoulder should take your head back a little bit as
Hmm.
opposed to like physically turning your head before your shoulders rotate. So I think that's a big one, just like to start. But then, kind of the similar things that I just mentioned of, having your starting position somewhere similar to what your power pocket looks like, because, wherever we start with the disc, that's where we naturally want to get back to when we go to pull through. And then, especially for hitting gaps, and it's important anywhere, but reaching back straight away from your target line is
Yeah.
so important because, really no matter what your shoulder rotation looks like or what your footwork looks like, you need to reach away straight away from your target, because if you're not doing that, it doesn't really matter how good everything else is, because it's just not going to be set up to pull through on a straight
Hmm.
line. And so you see guys like, Eric Oakley, for example, who is very much running up right to left. Like he starts
Hmm.
off the tee pad on the right side and like
Yeah.
plants on the front left corner to throw a hyzer off the right side.
Right.
Um, but and he does like a kind of a roundy reach back and some other things that I wouldn't say are like technically sound. But one thing
Hmm.
that he does do consistently is reach away straight away from the target. Like
Yeah.
wherever that is, like it looks weird, but he actually does reach straight away.
Yeah, the kind of interesting thing is disc golf, and this is true for most sports. It's really about position work. So, are you getting to certain key positions? And in between there doesn't actually matter all that much as long as you're consistently getting to those positions. So a really
Yep,
good example for anyone that's a golf fan is Scotty Scheffler. He has a very unorthodox form, but he gets into his positions perfectly. So
for
he is
sure.
not the ideal person to like model your form after. I would say maybe this isn't the perfect example, but like Matteo. I
Yeah.
I love Matt. I know Matt. I would never teach someone to throw like Matt, right?
No,
But
of course
he
not.
makes it work. His form is his, and he
Yeah.
gets into the positions.
Yep.
Um, but going back to the question, if I would say most often, if I see someone struggling with kind of being a sprinkler system, left to right misses a lot, that's probably going to indicate that you've got a little bit of rounding to me. The reason for that is if you think about it from a perspective of the line of your pull through, right? So if you're reaching straight back, going straight to your target, you're going to have a straight line for the most part. It
Yep.
has to uncurl a little bit when you throw. Um, but if you're rounding, you're coming behind your body, and now all of a sudden your arm or your hand is on an arcing path, right? And so the wider that arc, the bigger the angle discrepancy is in small
For sure.
um, timing misses. So if you're a little early, you're going to be way farther off left than if you're a little early on a straight pull through. So
Yep.
from a form perspective, that would probably be my diagnosis. But from I think a lot of this is just a mental aspect that
Absolutely.
I've come to realize in recent years, which is talking to yourself and being confident is actually just so important
Yeah.
because the thing that I do that I found helped me, and it just was a random thought I had one day. I was looking at kind of a intimidating gap, and I said to myself as I was walking up, said, "No, you're gonna pimp this," and then dead center down the gap. Said, "Oh, that worked. I'm gonna try it on the
Yep.
next hole." Dead center
Yep.
every time, and so every time I see a wooded gap, that's what I say. Right. And so there is an element of trusting your form, doing all this, but really just being confident, right? The more you worry, the tenser you're going to be.
For
Getting that
sure.
confidence instilled in you is going to let you, is going to allow you to trust your mechanics that you've actually worked hard on in your practice. And you're going to be more consistent that way, I feel.
Yeah. How much do you feel like having specific swing thoughts like plays into confidence? Because I feel like for me, if I'm just going out and throwing, and like don't
Hmm.
I'm not thinking about anything, not having my two or three swing thoughts to think about, then like it's just really hard to find that confidence.
Hmm.
Because if I'm just throwing and I miss my line or I throw it out of bounds or something like that, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, like that was a bad throw. But if you have like your swing thoughts that you're thinking about, then you could do all of those things right, and the shot is still going to end up bad sometimes. Like that's just
Yeah.
how this game works. But if you have those things to think about, and like for me, like it's like thinking about reaching away straight away from the target and being very intentional, like with my peak reach back point. And if you're doing that, or if I'm focusing on that, then I can do that really well, but I might miss my angle a little bit or something
Right.
like that. But I can take a small win, which is then, building up my confidence for the next shot. Uh,
Hmm.
and like you said, confidence is so key. But I do think there are some like strategies with either swing thoughts or just like how you've done intentional form work in the past that can make finding that confidence like on the course way easier.
Yeah, 100%. Swing thoughts are kind of like they're like a little comfortable home you can come back to when you're on the
Yep.
course. When things get a little
Yep.
stressful, it's the thing you've done 1,000 times, right? It's like any other round. I say this every time. This is no different. Which it is different. Obviously, the circumstances are different and the stakes are probably higher, but you kind of have to trick your brain. That's the whole
Yep.
that is all of tournament play is tricking your brain into this isn't stressful. I'm having a good time.
Absolutely.
Um in terms of specific swing thoughts, it actually depends on the day for me. So sometimes, especially on putting, right? It depends on a lot on how I perceive my misses on the practice putting green. If it's a particularly bad day, I just don't think about anything. And I've
Yeah.
actually had my best tournament putting performance doing that. It was Jacksonville Open 2021. I
Okay.
went like 100% C1, 75% C2 on like the windiest day of my life.
Nice. Yeah.
And I don't think I made a single practice putt. So I stopped putting. I said, I'm just going to go out there and do it.
For sure.
Right. But a lot of times for me on like the putting green, for instance, I'll think about, okay, back hip straight to the target, right? Because for me in particular, a lot of times I'll have like a slightly right miss because I'm going back hip across the target instead of to the target, right? So it's
Hmm.
pulling my line off just a little bit. So it's a lot about knowing your form intimately, at least for me, knowing your form
Yeah.
intimately, knowing what your misses mean in terms of what you have to fix, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. And I think, everyone is different, and like you
Hmm.
can find some similarities. And we were talking about earlier, like some people that like I've taken inspiration from. And so, like, me feeling like I look like them may get me to the right swing thought or the right actual output that I'm looking for, but it might actually not look like them. So
Yeah.
I think there's definitely some like self experimentation that needs to be done from people by figuring out like what feelings work best for them to create that output setting. And obviously I think there are very few like outputs that make people successful. But there are some different like inputs or feelings that different people need to have, because obviously I think something that I might feel or be trying to do for my swing like might completely not work for you like at all whatsoever. And
Yeah.
same in the opposite way. And so I think just doing some self experimentation from everybody is like a super important thing to do. It's just like, oh, let me just try to throw like this guy today, or let me try to throw like this guy and see what, is getting
Hmm.
you better results or getting you better, a better look on while you're recording yourself, while you're practicing, or whatever it may be.
Yeah, 100%. Totally agree with that.
How important is getting off arm down next to the torso before the disc reaches it? That's a multi-layered question right there. There's some
Yeah.
things in that.
Yeah, okay, I'm going to condense this into how important is your off arm,
Okay.
right? And for me, for most people, my advice for most people, it's not the most important thing in the world. Now, if you're throwing and your off arm's way out here the whole time, yeah, we're gonna fix that a little bit, right? But
Yeah,
if it's you're getting it down kinda, and you got some other issues, I'm gonna tell you like, yeah, this is something you should address eventually. We're gonna work on other stuff right now.
for sure.
Um, Now, it is important when we're talking about high level play, right? In terms of, I always use, if you ever had any sort of physics class, where the example of the figure skater, where they
Yep.
hold their arms out and they spin, and then you put them in closer and you spin faster. It's kind of the same
Mhm.
concept, right?
Yeah,
So you want to get that arm tucked in close, so you have a like a smaller mass to rotate quicker, right? So
yep,
that is important eventually, but in terms of all the other problems people typically have, it's pretty low on this on the list.
for sure. I normally use the playground spinny thing that you pull in
Yeah,
to get close so you spin faster, which
it's the
is
same thing, yeah.
the didn't go to college version of what you said, basically.
Right. It's the same experiment. It's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah, it's the same thing. But yeah, I mean, I think, little like counterpoint on that, I do think like using the off arm, like especially at the peak reach back, can be really helpful to like get a little bit more shoulder turn
Hmm.
like feeling, because a lot of people have a hard time just rotating their shoulders. But
Right.
if you tell them to like pull their left elbow towards the target when they go to
Yeah.
peak reach back, that can be really really helpful. And I think there's a lot of people not using their off arm at all. um a few of the people that I've worked with recently, they're like peak reach back, their arm is just like hanging down,
Yeah.
like not doing anything, not helping rotate their shoulders, and it just stays in the same place as they go to pull through. Like it doesn't shoot down, it doesn't stay back. It just like,
Right.
and that just everything is rigid and rotating together. And so I
Yeah.
think a little bit like using that off arm can be very helpful, but I do agree with you that it's not like one of those things where, like, if you're doing some of the things like we talked about earlier, if you're not reaching back on a straight line, or you have some like crazy alignment issues or some things like that, like, do I think like off arm needs to be talked about before those? Probably not. But for high level play, or if you're like getting to those upper tiers of form, it's
Hmm.
definitely something that like needs to be addressed.
100%. And someone that does what you do or what you were talking about very well is Nicholas Antela.
Yes.
He has that very iconic, like, arm really far out
Yep.
form, and I've actually noticed I kind of developed that subconsciously
Yeah.
recently, not to his extent at all, but doing exactly what you're talking about and using that kind of turning of the left shoulder if you're a righty,
Yep.
to get your shoulders all the way squared away from the target, and then actually still getting that arm down and close by your side. I mean, that can be good for one, position work, and two, also as a timing mechanism, right? So someone who talks about timings or timing hitches or whatever, however you want to call it, um, is Paul Ulibarri. He says it a lot for the little
Yep.
pump,
Yep.
right? And so you can use it as kind of the same thing where, okay, I'm starting my pull through or wherever, like as I come through with my arm or right before,
Yep.
however it is, it's going to be different for everyone because everyone has different wingspans, but
For
um,
sure.
you can use it as a reference point that's consistent every time.
Yeah. For you, like, you were talking about the Niklas and Tila type throw. Are you doing more of like the straight arm reach away? Because he's definitely like a little bit more extended with his arm. Or there's like
Hmm.
guys like Drew Gibson, who's like
Hmm.
here with his off arm in the peak reach back? Like, which one of those are you like closer to?
Probably somewhere in between, a little bit closer to Drew, I think. So it's
Okay.
kind of like
Yeah.
Drew's like kind of tucked in, I think. I'm
Yep.
more of like a 90 degree. Nicholas is
Okay.
like I'm at the
He's
disco.
yeah, yeah. He is very much ready to dance.
Yeah,
That's for
yeah.
sure. Yeah, I'm definitely closer to the Drew side as well. Probably closer than you. I'm like pretty dang close. I
hmm
get pretty elbow or fist close to armpit when I
Yeah.
go to my peak reach back. Since we're talking about a couple pros, there's a question here: Zach Nash or Cal Lonquist? And I think this is a super interesting question.
Huh.
And I'll take this one off the bat because I
Please do.
think, this is like a very interesting question because I think you couldn't choose two disc golf swings that are farther apart. For guys that like crush the disc, I
hmm
think these two guys are like the most opposite that you can be. And so I'll
Yeah.
do like a quick breakdown of the two of them. Zach Nash is super, like huge turn, long, slow extension, fire the lower body, like just super long in everything that he's doing. And Cal is very much like keep the disc close and compact, like arm bent a little bit still at peak reach back, and then just unload and whip everything through and create
hmm
like a very quick separation where then like I said, Zach is just very long, and he's so extended at peak reach back that like if he uses his lower body at all, it's lag,
Yeah.
like
yeah,
like
yeah.
he's so extended that there's no way that the disc can be rotating at the same or coming through at the same time as hips are. And so I
Yeah.
think super interesting question. Obviously, like both of the guys are like super good and have played very well and had great finishes in this past year. So it's like kind of hard to go between them. And also both of them are like super nice kids. But form wise, could not be more opposite. It's crazy.
I'm gonna pick a side
Okay.
because
I'll pick
I'm
one
gonna
after you.
okay, I'm gonna go Cal because the Zach Nash super far extended, like it feels like there's no lower body going sort of forms, they confuse me. I
Okay.
I look at
Yeah,
it and I'm like, why are you throwing so far? Like I get
for
it.
sure.
You're giant, the disc is a million feet away from you, you're generating a lot of power, but stop it. You
Yeah.
know, someone
Well, I
that's
was
like
gonna say
that.
too, I was gonna say like you have almost that like Cal reach, like you and Cal's reach back positions are very, very similar. That
I
like
am I'm
arm still bent
definitely
a little bit, like a
yeah.
little bit higher. Um, so
Yeah,
that's
I
kind of
am
funny.
definitely a compact player. Someone that does the full extension thing that maybe not as many people know, but they might know him more now is shout out to Jasper Till,
Okay.
USDGC distance champ.
Huh.
I think it's he won this year, I believe. He
Okay.
plays
Yeah,
for UNC.
I remember someone that won that I had never heard of, and I was like,
Yeah,
wow, who is this guy?
he plays for UNC Chapel Hill.
Okay.
I saw him throw in person a year or so ago. And he's one of those people it was kind of like AB. When you
Yeah.
see AB throw in person for the first time, you're like,
Yeah.
that sounds different.
Oh my gosh.
That is not what any disc golfer I've ever played with sounds
Yeah,
like. And it's just you can hear how fast the disc is coming out.
for
And he
sure.
has that super extended, like I think it's more jealousy than anything, honestly.
Yeah.
But for that, I'm going Cal.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of funny because, like, now that you mention that, and just as I'm thinking, like, I feel like Zach, and he's not small by any means. Like, he's still
hmm
probably, almost 6 foot, probably just under, but somewhere about that. And he, but he's probably the smallest of those people that have that super long extended swing. Because, like, another person that I'm thinking about that has that, and I don't know about this guy who won USDGC distance, but like Albert Tam, too, like
hmm
super long extended, but he's a giant. He's like
Yeah. Yeah. I
six
mean, you're like
four,
almost
two
7 feet or
forty.
something.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
he's huge. So like makes sense for someone like him, or like even Gannon, I think, to an extent, like because he's modeled off Shoestrick, and like Shoestrick in that
hmm
era of when he was insane had that similar throw. He's like kind of somewhere in between because he was definitely like quicker than Zach Nash is, but he's also still like long and extended at that peak reach back. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I'll honestly, I'm gonna take Zach's side because I think,
Okay.
and it's funny because I probably am more similar to Zach in like throw wise. And Zach did a little, and I stopped doing it now because like I did that like wide reach around kind of reach back where I'd like pump with a straight arm and then bring it back.
Hmm.
And I was doing that for a couple years. I've stopped doing it since. But then Zach picked up and started doing that, and then started throwing like even further than he did before.
I
But
said, "Oh
Zach and
man,
I
I
have
should go back."
very similar throws.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I'll side on Zach a little bit with that one. Quick
We have
comment
a
from YouTube.
yeah, I
Are you
was gonna
seeing
bring that
that?
up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, is lag good or bad in disc golf? Um, I want to preface this by saying that, people that are coming from like baseball or golf or tennis, even anything where you have something extended off your body, those sports are
Mhm.
naturally going to have way more lag than we do in
Mhm.
disc golf because you have that tool um, to, come off your body. Because in
100%.
golf, obviously, you're trying to start with the lower body, get everything coming. The club is so far behind in golf. It's even more behind in baseball. Like people in baseball,
Mhm.
like are completely open to the target when they're hitting the ball. So disc golf, I don't think is nearly as lag like heavy as those sports, but I do think there is like a slight little bit. But because we're using our hand, there's not as much room to have, the upper body be lagged behind. But like we were talking about earlier too, like that little bit of separation of starting the throw with the lower body and then letting the upper body catch up. That's obviously where, or maybe not so obviously for some people, but that's where so much power can come from, because the lower body starts it and then the upper body and the disc eventually has to catch up to that speed if you're doing everything well.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely I'm glad you brought up the other sports using tools comment, because that was the exact thing that came to my mind at first. I personally don't teach lag at all as a point of, you know,
Yeah, me neither.
uh yeah, I don't teach us like we have to get this lag here, because I'm way more worried about your upper body and your lower body firing at the same time, and getting it all working in as one unit
Yep.
versus creating the optimal, 20 millisecond lag or whatever it is. We don't even know what the
Yeah.
optimal lag is, right? We
No.
haven't done the biometric like kinesiology studies
Yeah,
to
for
know
sure.
any of this. So I think it's kind of a point of like there's other things to worry about, and you'll get to the timing that is best for your body just by doing certain practices.
Yep,
And that's something that having a coach that's knowledgeable can really help you with, because
for sure.
it gets a little in the nitty gritty at times of
Yeah.
like, all right, you're a half a second behind here,
Hmm.
and it doesn't seem like it, but it's going to get you 30 extra feet if you get
Yep.
it down.
Yep. Absolutely. Um, I want to do one of these questions that we got right now because I do think it kind of pertains to that question a little bit. And this is like when you said it's not something that we teach, like, and I don't teach lag either, because I feel like so many people um, get caught up in, more distance is just going to help me be better, and to an extent it is, and to an extent like you can be, you can throw farther and that will naturally help correct some things that you're doing with your form. But this question is, how do I level up the distance? Stuck at 500 and want to break into the 550 to 575 range.
That's a good
So,
place to be stuck.
yeah, like first thing is just like that's elite distance,
Yeah.
like that's top 1% of 1% distance. Like,
To
and
be
who
honest, you
knows
don't
what
need
this,
more.
yeah, like who knows what this distance is? Like, is this could be like distance contest distance, like with
Mhm.
wind or something like that. And I'd say if it's that, if you're throwing a Sky Annie with a flippy light disc in wind and you're getting 500, then there is probably room for you to level up distance. But if you're throwing golf lines 500, then I
Yeah,
don't
that's
think you need to
insane.
level up distance at all. And just like the consistency and accuracy is what needs to be leveled up. And so, what
Mhm.
I mainly teach, and there are a few people that I've worked with on like just like pure like power development, but it's so rare. And most of my teaching is to gain consistency. And
Yeah.
like what we talked about earlier, of like the difference between 350 to 400 or 300 to 350 is a completely different change than it is from 450 to 500, or like this guy's trying to level up from 500 to more. Like those
Mhm.
those two categories of distance change are completely different. And I think most people, they'll get from 300 to 400 in the consistency form changes. Well, they'll be adding accuracy and distance at the same time. And then once you have that good base of form, then you can go out and just like start ripping. Because something I
Yeah.
tell people all the time is, anyone that throws far in disc golf, or anyone that hits a golf ball far or hits a baseball far, like at some point, just obsessed over swinging or throwing as hard as they possibly
Yep.
could, over and
Absolutely.
over and over again. And so I
Mhm.
think there is like a speed training aspect of it. And like they talk about it in golf a lot, like a lot of golfers bring it up, but it's rarely talked about in disc golf. And I think
Yeah.
speed training itself is like super, super uh, important. Like it's just
Mhm.
super, super helpful. But I do think that you need to be, you know, you need to start with a good base. And that's why I teach like the consistency and the fundamental mechanics first, because I think if you establish those early, then or not even early, but like establish that as the base of your form work, and then build from there, and then try to do some speed training or start throwing hard from there, then I think that's much more beneficial.
Yeah. I totally agree. I'm gonna say two things. I'm gonna say one thing, and then I'm gonna refute it, kind of.
Sounds
um,
great.
so I 100% agree with what you were saying on. I guess three things. I 100% agree with what you were saying on. You need to do all this stuff beforehand, right? You need to get your form to a good baseline where you're consistent. You're
Yep.
consistently getting good power, right? If you're consistently stuck at 500, one, I might not even tell you you need to worry about it if you're not
Yeah.
looking to go on tour.
Yep.
Um, but two, if you're stuck there, I'm gonna go ahead and assume you have pretty good mechanics because you don't
Mhm.
accidentally get to a consistent 500.
Yeah.
Um, so assuming you have 95% of the way there form, there's always something that we could fix, right? That's where actual, like you were talking about, speed training and strength training comes into play,
Yes.
right?
For
So
sure.
I get people a lot of times that are in the like 300 to 350 and like, I think I just need to go to the gym. And it's like, I'm not going to say don't go to the gym because everyone should go to the gym. You should be
Yep.
healthy and get strong,
Yep.
right? But in terms of your disc golf game, it might actually hurt you, right?
Yeah.
Because you're going to change your actual body chemistry and your proportions by
Yep.
doing that. It's going to mess everything up,
For sure.
right? But when we're talking about going from 500 to 550, there is a strength requirement there where if you aren't putting out a certain amount of force with your body, like your pull through or your leg drive or whatever, you don't have the power generation to get there. So
Yep.
that's where having consistent and targeted strength training can really help. Here's where I'm
Yep.
going to refute myself. There are
Okay.
genetic freaks like Gannon Burr. Freak, I mean, in the most endearing and jealous term possible,
Yep.
right? He's like, what is he, like 6'7" or something?
He's getting there. He's taller every time I see him. That's for
Yeah,
sure.
he's giant. He's super lanky. He's going to generate way more mechanical advantage than I'm ever going to have,
Yep.
right? So his baseline perfect form is way higher than my baseline perfect form. And that's just a genetic thing. That's true in all sports. It's always
Yep.
going to be true. And there's nothing you can do about it.
Yep.
Um, Now, if Gannon got absolutely jacked, I mean, 1,500 feet, I don't know. Might have to go out to the desert flats,
For sure.
wherever David Wiggins was.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, like once you're over 500, like if you're trying to, build off that and try to like get some real power on top of that, it like almost becomes like a plyometric movement. Like it's
Hmm.
almost more similar to jumping at that point than it
Yeah.
is to like what you do to improve disc golf distance in any other distance category. And so I
Yeah.
think that explosiveness and like rotational strength and how you're
Hmm.
using your lower body and all of that becomes way more important, or that's where the gains are to be made, at least
Right.
when you get into that like top tier.
Yeah, when you're talking about plyometrics, that's exactly it. In terms of training your, I guess, fast twitch, your smaller muscle groups to actually be explosive, right? Because
Yep.
us just as basic humans, we don't have to do that. Those movements, all this is a very abnormal movement for humans. We don't do that very often. So we're not just default trains to do that from our body chemistry. So you have to train your body to do that. You have to basically tell your body it's okay for you to fire this hard. You're going to
Yeah,
be fine. And you're also going to make those muscles stronger by doing it.
for sure.
Um, and like you said, not a lot of people talk about it. The only person
Mm-mm.
I've ever really heard talk about speed training was strangely Paul Macbeth. He had a video a long time
Interesting.
ago where I can see the video in my head now. It was like 5 tips of Paul Macbeth or something.
Yeah.
Um, but it surprised me because he was like, when I was trying to learn how to throw far, I went out to a field every day and threw as hard as I possibly could until my arm hurt.
Yep.
And I'm like, okay, maybe I don't tell you to do that, but it does
But do
speak
that.
to, yeah, do it in a safe way.
Yeah.
Maybe know what you're doing first.
Yep.
But um it does speak to the truth of you do need to actually train for this stuff when you get to that
Absolutely.
high of a level.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Um, Kind of to bring all of this together, kind of what we've talked about today. This will be our last question. Um, and it is best tip slash mental cue to engage the hips. Because I think, we were talking about it earlier of,
Hmm.
people throwing rollers or having technique. And then we've talked about it a little bit from, the Zach Nash versus Cal Lonquist
Yeah.
separation, where they both use their hips, obviously, but they use them in very different ways. And then, even the plyometrics of, getting that top tier of distance and trying to get higher, so much of that, like, whippiness and that plyometric effect comes from the lower body. So, what do
Hmm.
you think is like one of the best cues or a couple of the best cues to engage the hips?
I don't know that I have a cue per se that I teach, but I use analogies a lot. So this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier with if you can see that angle when you're on your side profile, we
Yep.
want to get that to kind of a straight line. And so the analogy that I use is imagine you're going up to a door or a brick wall, right? And you want to get your entire body up to that wall. The wall is the line. And then from there, you want to explode through it and break through the wall, right? And so you're putting basically everything you can into that. And that includes driving that hip all the way through your target. I always tell people I would rather you over rotate than under rotate. I
Yep.
don't care if you look stupid and spin around like a ballerina. That's fine. Your disc will probably go the right way, so who cares?
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I always say over rotate more than under rotate. Ideally, I'd like to see you like balanced on your one leg, stay in control,
Yep.
right? But at least I think aiming actually has a lot to do with lower body, and
Hmm.
people don't talk about it all that much.
For sure.
So if you're not getting your hip all the way through, one, you're not generating as much
Are you
power as you
saying
could.
left hip or right hip for this?
So I'm saying left hip because
Okay.
I
Yep.
think that's the driving. I guess you can also think about it as pulling your right hip back because that's
Hmm.
gonna like cause that moment anyway.
Yeah.
Um, but I always think about it as a left hip.
Yeah.
But the reason I always say I'd rather you over rotate is because you need to get squared up to your target because if you don't, then now you're all of a sudden having to correct with your arm to get to your target line.
For sure.
And that's going to be way more inconsistent in the
Yep.
long run. If you over rotate, at least you got there, right?
Yeah.
You might have some timing issues and pull
Gave
it a little
yourself the
right.
opportunity,
Yeah,
at least.
it's like it always miss your putts long. If they were short, they never had a chance.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think, I'll take kind of the counterpoint on this of the right hip, because,
Hmm.
I do think getting the left hip through is super important. But then, once you get to the like higher tier, or some people naturally kind of do use their left side well, but don't, clear their right side out. And so, a feel for me is one, kind of dropping that left knee down and in, which helps kind of get that left side going. But then also just like really pushing hard against that plant leg and trying to drive that, not necessarily drive the right hip back, but really make sure you're stopping all of that energy. Because to be
Yeah.
able to get your left hip kind of starting to come forward and drive the throw, you need to stop the energy. Because if
Hmm.
that front side is shifting, then there's no ability to rotate at all. So I do think it's like kind of both pieces are important, but definitely like getting that left side going, I think is where more of the power comes from. But you obviously have to have that right side just to be able to even use the left side at all. They kind
Yeah.
of have to both be working together.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, making sure that your plant leg is nice and firm and steady and also in the correct position. I'm sure we'll talk about this one day, but plant foot position, making sure that you are in an ideal spot to brace is so important because if you're not bracing properly, it doesn't matter how much power you're generating, you're losing so much of it that you're never going to get that much distance.
For sure. Yeah, totally agree. Do you have any other finishing thoughts from today's episode to send the people off with?
I hope that if you're struggling with form, you go check out Formero, find one of the many coaches that are on there, and go get some personalized help. Because, in all honesty, disc golf form is really hard to do by yourself. Maybe we'll talk about it a little more next episode, but I have a similar background to Tristan where I had to teach myself everything.
Yeah,
And it took a long time and it's
for
still a work
sure.
in progress. So getting that personalized help to your form is really important. It's going to save you a lot of time and it's not that expensive. So
Yep.
it's definitely a worthwhile investment.
Totally agree. Yeah. Yeah, Formero, check out the app. There's, form reviews, what we call Formeros. There are live calls in there. There's full chat features if you subscribe to someone. And we have a lot of great coaches, certified and pro, on the app right now. So, go and check out the app, get some personalized form review help because, like Max said, it is so important. And I still wish I'd love to have a coach that I mesh with well. I haven't found one
Yeah.
directly yet, but someone even to help me in my like player side because obviously I can coach very well, but doing it for yourself, there's just some limitations. So I'm still trying to find someone for that, but obviously we have a lot of people that can help you guys listening. Um,
We'll just
and
do it for
yeah,
each other.
yeah, that
An
sounds
episode
good.
is just me and Tristan breaking each other's form down.
Yeah, yeah. That'll probably end really well. That
Yeah,
we
I'm
won't
sure.
we won't yeah, we
That's the
won't
last
clash on
podcast
anything.
episode.
Yeah. Exactly. All right, everyone, thanks for tuning in to today's episode. We'll be live again next week, 9 p.m. Eastern. So come join us again. Drop us any questions that you would like to have answered on the podcast, and we'll get to them. But thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next week.
Peace.
All right.